timely, engaging, and in-depth look at issues of interest to the citizens of North and South Carolina. From the WJZY studios, it's Charlotte Now with Mike Collins.
Good evening. 2 weeks ago, Christopher Stevens, the U.S. ambassador to Libya, and 3 members of his staff were murdered during an attack on our consulate in Benghazi, Libya. Days later, the U.S. embassy in the capital of Yemen was attacked. In the days that followed, riotous mobs threatened our embassy in Egypt, even as violence was directed at U.S. embassies in Tunisia and Sudan. And the protests weren't confined to the Middle East. Demonstrations also took place outside our embassy in London, Jakarta, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, as well as other cities in many countries. All of this because of an amateur film ridiculing the Muslim prophet Muhammad and portraying him in dubious and distasteful ways. These incidents highlight the precarious nature of conditions in the Middle East, tension between East and West, and the suspicions of those in the Islamic world about our intentions toward their religion. But these incidents also highlight the dangers faced by our diplomatic corps around the world, the wisdom of placing these representatives in volatile locations, and our ability to keep them safe. Congress held hearings on just that this past week. And that's what we'll explore this hour with 2 experts on international relations, including a former U.S. ambassador. That when we come back. Well, far from being a cushy job, life in the diplomatic corps can be quite dangerous, as recent events certainly prove. And tonight we're going to talk about the realities of diplomacy with 2 gentlemen who know about it. Ambassador Mark Erwin served from 1999 to 2001 as United States Ambassador to the Republic of Mauritius, the Republic of the Seychelles, and the Federal Islamic Republic of the Comoros. Thank you for being here. And L.J. Stambuk is President and CEO of the World Affairs Council in Charlotte. He's brought me many guests over the past years, usually sitting on the other side of the studio, but nice to have you with us. The trouble in Libya that began all this with the murder of Ambassador Stevens and 3 of his people in the embassy in Libya caught us off guard. Should it have?
Well, it was actually in Benghazi in the consulate,
right.
Unfortunately. Should it have surprised us? It's a war zone. The country is in complete chaos and turmoil, and the ambassador, who is one of our best ambassadors, he's just an incredibly good guy. He knew what he was getting into, but he loves those people. He loves that part of the world. He had served there for many years, and he wanted to make a difference.
Well, this is both puzzling and troubling because CNN is reporting now that in the months leading up to his death, Ambassador Stevens worried about constant security threats in Benghazi, not just in Tripoli, but in Benghazi, where he ended up being killed. And he mentioned that his name was on an al-Qaeda hit list. Would he not have told someone? Would we not have provided extra security, particularly when he went to Benghazi, because he's been reporting these threats or had been talking about these threats, was aware of these threats?
We don't know yet what his total security detail was, because typically when an ambassador moves around, he moves around in a bulletproof vehicle. He has lead cars that go out even before he goes out, and they watch the trail, and then he has trailing cars, and they see who moves and who doesn't move as he's moving along. So he had a lot of security, not just the other 3 people that were killed. And you know, one of the things that you do as an ambassador is you realize that you're at risk. You're the president's personal representative as ambassador, and as such, you represent the whole nation. And so and there are people everywhere in every country that are envious or jealous or dislike us because of the color of our flag, whatever the reasons are. There are people that don't like us. So you're always under some form of threat, no matter where you are, serving in the United States Department of
Now,
State.
now, correct me if I'm wrong, LJ, you are the son of a diplomat.
Yes, I am.
Not an American diplomat.
Not an American
What
diplomat.
country?
It was the former Yugoslavia.
Okay. But you have remarked to us that security at American embassies around the world is particularly high. In spite of what we've just been talking about, our embassies can look like fortresses.
I was in Geneva about 2 years ago, and there's an embassy row, and it's very interesting. You go by the embassy of Italy, you go by the embassy even of Russia, and they're approachable. They look like embassies. Our embassy has barbed wire, armed guards, concrete obstacles. It looks like a fortress.
Why? Why us? I mean, particularly when you put the Russians in, and you're talking about Geneva, Switzerland, which is neutral territory. It's not exactly a hotbed of seething activity. Why do we feel the need to be so protective?
My father and I grew up in Holland. My father served in Holland, and I read something that Paul Bremer said, who was an ambassador to Holland 25 years ago. And he said the security, even then, in a country like Holland, for him, was such that he could not go out with his kids to have ice cream. He would have to announce it. They would organize the security detail, and even then, 25 years ago, you had to be protected. In the case of my then country, Yugoslavia, we had the same kind of protection. We had police, local police, stop by our residency where we lived. We had armed guards, drivers. It's part of being a diplomat. Every diplomat, U.S. diplomat that joins the service knows there's danger. There's always people out there for one reason or the other who want to do harm to a particular country or a particular diplomat.
And they range to nutcases. I mean, people are just a little off in their head.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't believe the numbers of communications and letters and phone calls that I received in these small countries where I was serving from just complete nutcases. I still have a collection of them. They're fascinating, but they don't make any sense.
Right.
And so,
But with the British ambassador, with the ambassador from, I don't know.
yes, everybody gets them.
They all
because
get
you're a high-profile person, you're in the press constantly, you're representing a country, a whole country. And so if somebody's got a grudge against the United States, you're the guy. You get the grudge. But, you know, speaking of security, even where I served, which is a very peaceful part of the world. We had Hezbollah there and Tamil Tigers and Zamzam and a number of terrorist groups that were moving throughout there. In fact, Comoros, one of my host countries, was the country where they planned the bombing of our two embassies in Africa, in Kenya. And so it's always dangerous, but you do the best you can, and then you have to just go on and do your job.
Well, at first this looked like it might have been just a bunch of riotous people who got carried away and attacked the embassy and got lucky. But now they're saying that this was a terrorist attack on our consulate, not the embassy, our consulate, as you say, in Benghazi. Did we see it? He saw it coming. The ambassador saw it coming. Is this an intelligence failure? Is this naivete on our part, thinking that, well, whatever happens, we can handle it? How could this happen?
It's the risk of war. Transporting an ambassador around is
But we helped
extremely
Libya
risky.
in that war.
Not only that,
but terrorists are always plotting to get somebody, and they love the highest profile person they can get. I had no doubt from the beginning that this was a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
And it was just in the guise of a demonstration that got out of hand. Probably the terrorists took advantage of the demonstration. They may have planned the demonstration too, and set it up to cover the event. But that doesn't mean that the ambassador just stays locked up in his embassy, where he does have much higher security, just like the president doesn't stay locked up in the White House. He has to move around to do business on behalf of the country.
LJ.
and that's the job of a diplomat. That's very important to note. They have to be out there. They have to get to know the lay of the land. They have to get information. They have to shake hands. It is always dangerous. And again, to say the people that work in the State Department, when they get the job, they know they're going, in some cases, mostly in most cases, they're going to dangerous places. I would say for Ambassador Stevens in Benghazi, People don't know. He served in Benghazi as deputy chief of the embassy there, and then he was the envoy in 2011, appointed as the envoy to the rebels against Gaddafi. He did a lot of good work there. He helped a lot of people, and what I hear is that there was an outpouring of grief among the leaders of the city of Benghazi because he was universally beloved. This was, and I agree with Ambassador Erwin, this was a premeditated terrorist attack, and yesterday the administration used the word terrorist attack for the first time. They now have a name of a gentleman called Sufyan bin Kumu, who was in Guantanamo. He was released in 2007. He's associated with the Anwar al-Sharia brigade that is widely believed to have been behind this, and I think they used the opportunity of the demonstration to get to the ambassador. Now, what do you get with that? There's a political power battle going on. It's the moderates are trying to control the country after a revolution. The extremists are trying, Al-Qaeda especially, are trying to take, and this gives them visibility.
But beginning with the Bush administration, and actually in a program that he started, President Bush started, and which has now been expanded by the Obama administration, we are actively sending diplomatic personnel into areas of the world that we would have pulled them out of for their own protection in years gone by. This is called, it's something called transformational diplomacy. Is that why Ambassador Stevens was where he was on that day?
That's certainly part of it. The idea is that we can't just pull back and isolate ourselves. What goes on in all of these nations affects us at home in so many ways that you can't count. And so we feel as a country that we're better off engaging, even in places that are not safe. And we're in many countries around the world that are just generally not safe.
And we send military personnel into situations where they're certainly not safe because they're fighting wars, but we give them the training that they need, we give them the equipment that they need, and still many of them die and are terribly injured. What do we do for the diplomatic corps besides hire people to protect them? Because in many cases, I'm told, these are not Marines protecting these people. These are not mercenary forces, but they're outside private contractors.
90%.
So what are we doing to protect these people, our diplomatic corps?
Well, many of the private contractors are militarily trained by our services. Many of them were SEALs and were Rangers and, you know, the elite of our military services. And they're extremely well trained.
Are there enough of them? Because there have been expense cutbacks.
I think there are enough. You know, there are some things you just can't protect against unless, and our troops are not, or our private contractors are not allowed to arm up to the same level of the military. They can't carry submachine guns and rocket launchers and things of that nature.
Then why use them? Because that's exactly what the terrorists used. They used rocket launchers.
Well, it's the obligation of the host country to protect foreign diplomats in their country. It is their distinct obligation, and here in this country, it's the obligation of the United States to protect any foreign dignitary that comes in, whether it's their foreign service or their leadership.
And to go back to Kabul, I was present when Ambassador Crocker was moving. I was with him in the car when we were moving 1 mile away, very close by from our embassy to our military headquarters, which is a very protected area. And exactly as Ambassador Erwin described, there was a lead car, a back car, a middle car. There's a lot of security and a lot of thought given to how to protect the diplomats, especially at his level.
We have to take a break. We'll come back with more on how we're keeping diplomats safe and what it all means and why in just a moment. Stay with us. More on the dangers of diplomacy, particularly for those who serve as diplomats and in our diplomatic service, with Ambassador Mark Erwin and also LJ Stambuk, who's the President and CEO of the Charlotte the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, I should say. We've been talking a lot about security, and you mentioned, LJ, that our embassies around the world are fortresses with outer walls and security things to get into, while others are not. Other nations' embassies are not quite as protected. What does all this cost us in terms of protection?
Well, it used to be a lot less expensive, but in the past few years, the cost of a small embassy structure begins at $100 million. That's the beginning point for small embassies in the world, and it goes up well over $1 billion.
And is most of that to build them extraordinarily well so they are immune to bombs and rockets, or what is that money going to?
It's a combination of hardening of the building. I mean, most of them now have bulletproof glass.
So what does that say about us in the world? I mean, are we the big target because we're the big dog, or are we the big target because of something that we're doing wrong, either in our foreign policy or our military policy? Why the need for this?
Well, because we're the big dog, number one, we're the largest military force in the world, we're the largest economy in the world, we're the wealthiest nation, large nation in the world. And when you put all those things together, you create envies and jealousies and, you know, all kinds of issues, especially in countries where they're suffering from 50% plus unemployment rates and lots of young people with lots of testosterone and nothing to do.
But if we take the short drive to Washington, D.C. and get to Embassy Row and start walking down past the embassies from other countries, they look like unassuming homes in some cases. Some of them are big buildings because they're bigger countries, but they don't seem to be fortresses. You don't see a lot of soldiers or munitions or barbed wire, and some of our embassies in some of the countries that they are in have all of that. And you deal with ambassadors and people like that from all over the world. How do they get along without it?
Well, I would agree with Ambassador Erwin. It has to do with we're the top dog. And something that I want to share with your viewers, I travel a lot around the world. People love Americans. People love our culture. People love our movies. A lot of them want to come. They will go in the street and protest. At the same time, they would like to come and live here. Sometimes they disagree with our policies. And being so big, we do sometimes have policies that affect some segments of the society or some countries in a way they're not happy with. Yeah. When I was in Kabul, again, I do want to tell you this, the embassy of Germany was as protected as ours. The British embassy was protected as ours. And when the Haqqani attacked, immediately after I left, the Haqqani Taliban faction, they attacked not only us, but the Germans, the British, and other countries.
But that's because they're NATO allies in this fight against the Taliban.
True.
In a very hostile region of the world. But we're talking about our embassies being protected like this in Paris, for crying out loud.
Well, the other reason that we harden our embassies as well as we do today is that when a country puts an embassy in Washington, they know that the United States is going to protect that embassy, that we have the force, the power, the means to protect that embassy. We've never had an embassy breached in the United States. When we go into a place like Kabul or other parts of the world, I won't name countries, but when we go in there, we don't necessarily trust that the host government's military is going to protect that U.S. embassy as well as it needs to be protected.
Does the very fact of the extraordinary measures that we have to take to protect our people in our embassies, does that get in the way of the work that they were sent there to do? How can we be open and inviting when you have to go through security guards and all of our walls are topped with barbed wire?
And that's a very good point, and exactly that's why we had transformational diplomacy. They do go out and try to go out as much as possible, because if you sit behind barbed wires and you have moats and all that, you can't really be active and you can't really be effective as a diplomat. That's what Ambassador Stevens did, and he did it very well. Actually, he was there to open a hospital and to bring some U.S. aid to the medical systems in Benghazi. But then there's risk, and you can't control risk 100% of the time at every place around the world.
We've been talking about the risks, and obviously one of our ambassadors, the first in many, many years, lost his life in service to the country a couple of weeks ago. Most people's exposure to ambassadors is through movies and maybe some newscasts occasionally, and we think of these people living really lavish, nice lifestyles in beautiful embassies that we supply them, and they attending lavish, wonderful parties with the glitterati of the world. What's the reality of it?
Oh, that's all exactly right.
Okay, well, that's the end of that question.
No.
What is the reality?
The reality is that there are some postings around the world that are horrible places to be. You wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, but we have people who are there serving America in those places, just like our military has people in horrible places that you wouldn't wish on your children. We also have other posts where it is a grand lifestyle and beautiful surroundings and lots of parties and all that sort of stuff. And
but
so there's a little bit of all.
In the break, you were talking about Kabul and the embassy there and what a hardship post it really is.
Those people really are dedicated professionals. They have a life that you really can't imagine. They live in small trailers, 2 to a trailer, very small. You can't turn around in those rooms. Hot water is limited. These are highly trained professionals. The only person who had a better unit was the ambassador, but there are 1,000 people and that compound. The food is shipped in because Pakistan closed our roads to get to Afghanistan. Everything is shipped through air or through Russia and Central Asia. So the food is not very good at all, to put it mildly. They cannot bring their families. They're separated from their families while they're there. They go out and exposed to danger. It's a very hard place to be because you work with so many different factions and you try to bring democracy and promote democracy and interest of the United States. Yet the living conditions are such that are very hard. People go around with machine guns. You see people dressed like you and I and Ambassador Erwin in the morning going to their office within the compound that they have an M4. The first thing you see when you come to your room is what to do in the case of a rocket attack.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking a lot about ambassadors because they're the targets, they're the big guys, but there's a lot of people who help them and who work with them who go completely unsung and unknown. That's the people that you're talking about living in these tiny little trailers. What's their motivation? Why do they do what they do? Why would you want to put yourself in those situations in harm's way just to be in the diplomatic corps?
They love their work. We're a very open, free nation, and it's hard for us to understand some of these other places around the world that are not like us. But these are people who have spent a career dedicated to improving relations with other nations. And one of the things that you would find fascinating is that that the Foreign Service examination, which everybody has to take to become a member of the Foreign Service, is extremely difficult. And only the highest 2% that take it pass the exam. So these are people who are dedicated, smart, love their work, and they live in a different kind of world than we do.
I only have a couple of seconds left here, but before we started, we were talking about apps, iPhone apps and technology and things like that. I'm wondering, we live in this world now where we have apps. There's an app for that. Where we have teleconferencing, where we have instant communications. Are we going to see a time when we don't need to deploy a diplomatic corps, where we can all have our meetings on television in a conference room between nations?
Not in our lifetime, and I hope never, because it's the one-on-one contact, it's the personal approach that you can do. You cannot do it on television or anywhere else where you can look the person in the eye and so on.
And that's it. Looking the
Press
person
the
in the
flesh.
eye, press the flesh, talk, learn the lay of the land, learn the culture. You can't replace that with an app.
LJ Stambuk with the World Affairs Council of Charlotte and also Ambassador Mark Erwin. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for watching. And you can, if you have questions or suggestions about the program, you can email them to us at charlottenow@cw46.tv. Join us again next time.